couldn't do much. They increased patrols near our house and Elena's school, but that was all. We installed new security cameras and changed our routines, picking different routes to school each day. Mom started acting strange. She'd leave for grocery shopping and return hours later with nothing. Her phone would ring at odd hours, and she'd take the calls in her car. When I pressed her about it, she'd get defensive and accuse me of not trusting her. One afternoon, I came home early from school with a headache. Mom's car was in the driveway, but the house was empty. I found her in the garage packing Elena's old baby clothes into boxes. She jumped when she saw me, quickly closing the box and making excuses about spring cleaning. That night, I searched her phone while she slept. The deleted messages were still in her trash folder. Frank had been calling from prison, using other inmates' phone privileges. He'd convinced her that he was getting therapy, that he understood his mistakes, that he just wanted to see pictures of Elena to help him heal. The messages showed Mom had been visiting him. She'd brought photos of Elena at school, at her concert, even sleeping in her bed. My hands trembled as I scrolled through their conversations. Frank was manipulating her, playing on her guilt and their history together. I confronted Mom the next morning after Elena left for school. She broke down crying, admitting everything. Frank had promised he'd changed, that the therapy was working. He just needed to see that Elena was okay, to know she was happy. Mom thought sharing photos would help him let go, but Frank wasn't letting go. He was planning. Through Mom's visits, he'd learned our new routines, Elena's schedule, even which room she'd moved back into. He knew about the security cameras and our different routes to school. He'd been gathering information through Mom's misguided compassion. Uncle Carlos was furious when I told him. He arranged for Mom to stay with Grandma for a while, to break Frank's influence over her. We changed all our routines again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were playing into Frank's hands somehow. The calls to Mom stopped, but new problems started. Elena's favorite teacher suddenly requested a transfer. Her best friend's parents withdrew their daughter from the school. Other parents started keeping their children away from Elena at recess. Someone was spreading rumors about our family. I discovered Frank had contacts outside prison who were making anonymous calls to school parents. They claimed Elena was disturbed, that our family was dangerous, that child services were investigating us. The lies were carefully crafted to isolate Elena without technically breaking any laws. Elena started coming home in tears. Kids whispered about her at lunch. Birthday party invitations stopped coming. She begged to switch schools, but we couldn't afford private school and the district wouldn't approve a transfer without cause. Mom returned home, determined to fix things. She called every parent, explaining the situation, but the damage was done. Some believed her, but others remained suspicious. Elena retreated into herself, spending hours in her room with her stuffed animals. Then Frank's lawyer contacted us. He was filing for a custody evaluation from prison, claiming Mom was an unfit parent who denied him access to his child. The lawyer had statements from other inmates describing Frank as a reformed man, desperate to reconnect with his daughter. The legal filing meant Frank could demand supervised visits. Mom hired a lawyer with money borrowed from Uncle Carlos, but Frank had prison legal aid and plenty of time to build his case. He documented every photo Mom had shared as evidence of her supporting his parental rights. During this chaos, I noticed someone watching our house. A woman in her 30s would park across the street during school hours, pretending to read but clearly observing our home. When I approached her car one day, she drove off quickly. Uncle Carlos ran her license plate through a friend still on the force. She was a social worker who'd lost her license for falsifying reports. Frank had somehow connected with her through prison correspondence programs, promising to help her get reinstated if she helped him. We reported her to the police, but she hadn't technically done anything illegal. Sitting in a public street wasn't a crime. Following someone without making contact wasn't stalking. She knew exactly how far she could push without crossing legal lines. The stress was destroying our family. Mom barely slept, jumping at every sound. Elena had nightmares about Frank taking her away again. I started missing school to walk Elena to and from class, making sure no one approached her. Frank's custody hearing was scheduled for the following month. His lawyer filed motion after motion, each requiring responses that drained our finances. Mom sold her jewelry and took extra shifts at work to pay legal fees. Meanwhile, the harassment escalated. Dead flowers appeared on our doorstep. Elena's bike tires were slashed while it sat in our locked garage. Someone had been inside our home. The police found no signs of forced entry, and nothing was stolen, so they couldn't pursue it. I installed new locks and additional cameras, but the incidents continued. Whoever was doing Frank's bidding knew our schedules, our weaknesses. They were careful to stay just within legal boundaries while making our lives miserable. Elena's grades dropped. She stopped singing, stopped smiling. The confident girl who'd performed her solo was disappearing, replaced by an anxious child who flinched at unexpected sounds. Frank was destroying her without ever leaving his cell. Mom discovered Frank had been corresponding with multiple people outside prison. Through a network of prison pen pals and advocacy groups for incarcerated parents, he'd built a support system of people who believed his story of a loving father denied access to his child. These people, thinking they were helping reunite a family, provided Frank with resources and assistance. Some wrote letters to the judge supporting his custody request. Others donated to a fund for his legal expenses. A few even offered to provide supervised visitation venues. We tried explaining the truth to these people, but Frank had crafted his narrative carefully. He admitted to making mistakes but painted them as misguided love. He shared selective truths that made him seem sympathetic while portraying us as vindictive. The social worker who'd been watching our house escalated her tactics. She started approaching Elena's classmates' parents, claiming to be conducting an informal investigation. She'd share concerns about Elena's home environment, planting seeds of doubt. When confronted by school administration, she insisted she was just a concerned citizen. Without her license, she couldn't claim any official capacity, which paradoxically made it harder to stop her. She wasn't impersonating a social worker. She was just asking questions. Elena begged to be homeschooled, but Mom couldn't afford to stop working. I offered to drop out and teach her myself, but Mom refused to let me sacrifice my education. We were trapped between bad options. Frank's lawyer filed an emergency motion claiming Elena was being psychologically abused by being denied contact with her father. They cited her declining grades and social isolation as evidence, twisting the very problems Frank had caused into weapons against us. The judge ordered a psychological evaluation for Elena. The court-appointed psychologist was professional but overworked. In their brief session, Elena was too scared to fully explain her fear of Frank. The report noted she seemed anxious about her father but didn't find evidence of abuse. This played into Frank's hands. His lawyer argued that Elena's anxiety was due to parental alienation, that we'd poisoned her against her loving father. They requested immediate supervised visitation to begin repairing the relationship. Mom's lawyer fought back, presenting evidence of Frank's obsessive behavior and manipulation. But Frank had been a model prisoner, attending every therapy session and parenting class available. How does Frank manage to build such a big network of helpers from inside prison? The way he got all those pen pals and parent groups to believe his story shows he really understands how to make people trust him. That's both clever and really scary. On paper, he looked reformed. The judge ordered a trial period of supervised phone calls. Elena would have to speak with Frank for 15 minutes twice a week, with a court supervisor monitoring. Mom tried to appeal, but the order stood. The first call was a disaster. Frank spent the entire time crying about how much he missed his baby girl. Elena sat frozen, unable to speak. The supervisor noted she seemed uncomfortable but didn't witness any direct inappropriate behavior. After each call, Elena would lock herself in the bathroom and cry. She stopped eating properly, pushing food around her plate. Dark circles appeared under her eyes from nightmares. cameras. But legally, we had to make her take the calls or face contempt of court. Frank used the calls to gather more information. He'd ask innocent-sounding questions about her day, her friends, her activities. Elena tried to give vague answers, but he was skilled at manipulation. He'd guilt her for not sharing, crying about feeling shut out of her life. The supervised calls gave Frank's supporters more ammunition. They saw a father desperate to connect with a child who'd been turned against him. Some began harassing us directly, sending letters about the importance of father-daughter relationships. I started recording everything, every incident, every strange car, every hang-up call. I created detailed logs with times, dates, and descriptions. Uncle Carlos helped me organize it into a comprehensive file for Mom's lawyer, but Frank was always one step ahead. He'd studied law in prison, learning exactly what would and wouldn't violate his restrictions. Every action was calculated to cause maximum distress while maintaining plausible deniability. The woman who'd been watching our house filed a complaint with Child Services, claiming she'd witnessed neglect. Even though she had no credibility, the complaint triggered a mandatory investigation. A real social worker had to visit our home and interview Elena. The investigation found no issues, but the process was traumatic. Elena had to answer questions about her home life, her relationship with Mom and me, whether she felt safe. The very system meant to protect her was being weaponized against us. Mom started
Make waves with the Chevy Silverado's strength and advanced towing technologies. You couldn't ask for a better first mate. Lease a 2025 Silverado Crew Cab LT for just $229 a month. Put it in D and see why Chevy drives the Motor City.
started breaking down. She'd cry randomly during dinner, apologize constantly to Elena, blame herself for ever letting Frank back into their lives. I tried to hold everyone together, but I was only 16. The weight of protecting my family was crushing. Frank's phone calls became more manipulative. He'd tell Elena about other daughters who loved their fathers, about how empty his life was without her. He'd describe the future they could have together once he proved he was better. The supervisor noted Elena's distress, but said Frank wasn't technically violating any rules. He wasn't making threats or inappropriate comments. He was just a sad father sharing his feelings. The emotional manipulation was too subtle for official intervention. We tried switching supervisors, hoping someone else would recognize the manipulation, but the court system was overwhelmed, and supervisors were rotated randomly. Each new person saw only a fragment of the pattern. Elena started having panic attacks before the calls. She'd hyperventilate and shake, begging not to talk to him, but missing calls would violate the court order. Mom had to physically hold her sometimes while I dialed the number. Frank filed another motion, claiming the calls were going well and requesting video calls. His lawyer argued that seeing Elena would help him better connect with her. They presented certificates from every prison program he'd completed as evidence of his rehabilitation. Our lawyer countered with Elena's medical records showing anxiety and weight loss since the calls began, but Frank's team argued this was due to our negative influence, not the calls themselves. They painted us as sabotaging his efforts to reconnect. The judge compromised, ordering one video call per month in addition to the voice calls. Elena would have to see Frank's face, let him see how much she'd grown. The thought made her physically sick. I researched every legal option. Could we move out of state? Not without court permission, which Frank could block. Could we get a restraining order? Not without proof of direct threats or violence. The system that should have protected Elena was failing her. The first video call was scheduled at the courthouse with better supervision. Elena wore the most childish outfit she could find, hoping to bore Frank by appearing unchanged, but seeing her on screen made him cry with joy. He spent the call reminiscing about her baby years, telling stories about feeding her bottles and rocking her to sleep. Elena sat rigid, occasionally nodding when the supervisor prompted her to respond. Frank seemed oblivious to her discomfort, lost in his fantasies. After the call, Elena threw up in the courthouse bathroom. She hadn't eaten that morning, so it was mostly bile. I held her hair back while she sobbed, promising I'd find a way to make it stop. But Frank's behavior during the supervised calls was technically perfect. He followed every rule, never said anything inappropriate, just shared his feelings and memories. The supervisor saw a loving father, not the predator we knew him to be. His supporters increased their pressure. They organized letter-writing campaigns to the judge, started a social media page about fathers' rights, shared Frank's story as an example of parental alienation. Our names weren't public, but Elena lived in fear of being identified. Mom hired a private investigator to look into Frank's prison activities. We needed proof of his manipulation, evidence of the network he'd built. But Frank had been careful, using intermediaries and keeping his direct communications clean. The investigation Later found connections between Frank and the disgraced social worker, traced money from his supporters to her accounts, but proving Frank had directed her actions was nearly impossible. Prison communications were monitored, and he'd been too smart to leave evidence. Elena's best friend's family moved away suddenly. Her parents admitted they couldn't handle the drama surrounding our family. Elena lost one of her last connections to normal childhood, another casualty of Frank's campaign. I started staying up at night, researching custody law and parental rights. There had to be something we'd missed, some legal avenue to protect Elena, but every path led to the same conclusion. Without proof of direct harm, Frank retained parental rights. Mom considered drastic measures. She researched countries without extradition treaties, calculated how much money we'd need to disappear, but running would make us criminals, and Elena deserved better than a life in hiding. The calls continued, each one chipping away at Elena's spirit. Frank would cry about missing her birthday, describe presents he wanted to buy her, promise wonderful times when he got out. He painted himself as the victim, Elena as his salvation. I noticed patterns in Frank's supporters' activities. They seemed to know when we'd be home, when Elena had school events, when Mom worked late. Someone was feeding them information, but we couldn't figure out who. Then I discovered Mom's phone had been cloned. Every text, every call, every calendar entry was being monitored. The investigator traced it back to the prison's computer lab, where Frank had library privileges. He'd been watching our every move through Mom's digital life. We got new phones with better security, but the damage was done. Frank knew our lawyer's strategy, our financial situation, every detail of our lives. He'd been playing chess while we played checkers, always 3 moves ahead. The custody hearing approached like a storm on the horizon. Frank's lawyer filed motion after motion, each requiring expensive responses. They requested character witnesses, psychological evaluations, home studies. Every requirement drained our resources and energy. Mom worked overtime to pay legal bills, leaving me to care for Elena most evenings. I helped with homework, made dinners, tried to maintain normalcy, but how could anything be normal when her father was orchestrating our destruction from a prison cell? Frank's manipulation reached new levels during calls. He'd mention things only someone watching our house would know, like the new flowers Mom planted or the color of Elena's backpack. The implicit threat was clear. He had eyes everywhere. The supervisor dismissed our concerns, saying Frank was just trying to show interest in Elena's life. Many incarcerated parents asked similar questions. Without explicit threats, it was considered normal conversation. I started taking Elena to school through different routes each day, sometimes doubling back or taking unnecessary detours. The disgraced social worker still appeared occasionally, but less predictably. We were living like fugitives in our own town. Frank requested Elena's school records for his legal case. The school had to comply with the court order, giving him access to every report card, every teacher's note, every documented incident. He was building his case with our own information. His lawyer argued that Elena's declining performance proved she needed her father's influence. They twisted every fact to support their narrative. Elena's anxiety became evidence of maternal inadequacy. Her social isolation proved we were controlling. The judge ordered family therapy sessions via video call. A therapist would mediate conversations between Frank and Elena, supposedly to repair their relationship. Elena begged not to go, but refusal would violate the court order. The first therapy session was excruciating. Frank dominated the conversation, talking about his feelings and desires while Elena sat silent. The therapist, following standard reconciliation protocols, encouraged Elena to share her emotions with her father. Frank's crying about missing his baby girl while she sits frozen feels like watching someone play emotional violin with broken strings. The supervisor noting discomfort, but no inappropriate behavior. That's like saying the Titanic had a small ice problem. When Elena finally spoke, she chose her words carefully. She missed the father she'd imagined before he came home, the one who'd respect her age and interests. Frank twisted this into missing him, crying about how he wanted to be that father. After 3 sessions, the therapist recommended continued contact with gradual increase. They saw Frank's emotional responses as genuine desire to connect, not manipulation. Elena's carefully worded objections were interpreted as fear that could be overcome. Our lawyer presented evidence of Frank's prison communications, his network of supporters, the harassment we'd endured, but without direct proof linking Frank to specific incidents. The judge considered them unfortunate coincidences. Frank's parole hearing was scheduled for 6 months away. With good behavior and completed programs, he had a strong chance of early release. The thought of him free, with court-ordered access to Elena, kept me awake at night. Mom finally broke her silence about Frank's past. She revealed incidents from before his imprisonment that she'd never reported. Times when his affection for baby Elena had seemed excessive, when she'd found him in Elena's nursery at odd hours, just watching her sleep. But without documentation, these revelations were dismissed as desperate attempts to deny a father his rights. Frank's lawyer argued Mom was manufacturing memories to support her case. The judge warned her about making unsubstantiated allegations. Elena's 12th birthday approached. Frank fixated on it during calls, lamenting missing her childhood birthdays. He'd already sent presents through his supporters, all age-inappropriate toys that sat unopened in our garage. I planned a small celebration with just family, trying to give Elena normalcy, but Frank's influence poisoned even that. He'd convinced several relatives that we were being cruel, denying him participation in his daughter's life. The birthday came and went with forced smiles and underlying tension. Elena blew out candles on a cake she barely touched, opened presents she didn't want, endured phone calls from relatives urging her to forgive her father. Frank used the birthday as ammunition in court. His lawyer argued we'd deliberately excluded him from a milestone moment. They requested makeup time, additional calls to compensate for missing the celebration. The judge granted it. Elena would have to endure extra contact as punishment for our attempt to give her a peaceful birthday. Every effort to protect her was turned against us in the twisted logic of the legal system. Mom's health started deteriorating. The stress manifested physically as headache, insomnia, and stomach problems. She missed work for doctor's appointments, adding financial strain to our mounting pressures. I considered dropping out of school to work full-time, help with legal bills, but Mom refused, insisting I graduate. She'd sacrificed too much for me to throw away my future. We argued about it constantly, adding to the family tension. Frank's next move was masterful in its cruelty. He filed a complaint with the prison, claiming we were violating his religious rights by not allowing him to pray with Elena. He'd suddenly discovered faith, joining every religious program available. The prison chaplain supported his request, writing letters about Frank's spiritual transformation. They described a man seeking redemption, wanting to share his newfound faith with his daughter. The narrative was compelling to those who didn't know the truth. A judge ordered religious counseling sessions added to our requirements. Elena would have to attend video calls with Frank and a chaplain discussing spirituality and forgiveness. The sessions were scheduled for Sunday mornings, ruining our one peaceful day. During these sessions, Frank would weep about his sins and beg Elena's forgiveness. The chaplain, well-meaning but naive, encouraged Elena to open her heart to forgiveness. They couldn't see the manipulation beneath Frank's performance. Elena tried explaining her fear during one session. Frank immediately broke down, blaming himself dramatically while subtly suggesting Elena was being unforgiving. The chaplain comforted Frank, inadvertently reinforcing that Elena was hurting her father. I watched my sister disappearing. The bright, confident girl was replaced by a shadow who spoke in whispers and flinched at sudden movements. Frank was erasing her childhood as surely as if he'd locked her in that that toddler bed forever. The legal bills were crushing us. Mom sold her car, taking buses to work. We ate rice and beans most nights, saving every penny for lawyer fees. Uncle Carlos helped when he could, but he had his own family to support. Frank knew about our financial struggles through his network. His supporters would sometimes leave envelopes of cash in our mailbox with notes about helping Elena. We couldn't keep the money without looking like we were accepting their narrative. The custody trial date was set. 3 days of hearings that would determine Elena's fate. Frank would appear via video link, presenting his case for increased access. Our lawyer prepared Elena to testify, though the thought terrified her. In preparation, Frank's lawyer deposed everyone in our lives. Teachers, neighbors, relatives, all had to answer questions about our family. Some supported us, but others had been influenced by Frank's campaign of manipulation. The deposition revealed how deeply Frank's network had penetrated our community. People we'd trusted repeated his talking points about parental alienation. Former friends testified about Mom's protectiveness as if it were pathological. Elena's therapist was called to testify. Despite our hopes, they remained neutral, stating that while Elena showed signs of anxiety, they couldn't determine the cause. Frank's tears during sessions were noted as signs of genuine emotion. I testified about finding Elena in the toddler bed, about the baby clothes and sippy cups, but Frank's lawyer painted me as a jealous sibling, resentful of attention Elena received. They twisted my protectiveness into possessiveness. Mom's testimony was brutal. Frank's lawyer questioned her about every decision, every moment of their marriage. They brought up her visits to Frank in prison, the photos she'd shared, using her compassion against her. Throughout it all, Frank appeared on screen in his prison uniform, looking reformed and remorseful. He'd lost weight, aged considerably, and perfected the image of a broken man seeking redemption. Even I almost believed it sometimes. The judge would decide within 2 weeks. Those 14 days stretched endlessly, each morning bringing fresh dread. Elena barely ate, barely slept, barely spoke. She was shutting down, protecting herself the only way she knew how. While we waited, Frank's harassment continued through his proxies. Anonymous calls to Mom's work complained about her performance. Elena's new teacher received concerned letters about her home situation. The pressure never stopped. I turned 17 during this waiting period. There was no celebration, just another day of anxiety and fear. My childhood had ended the day Frank came home from prison. Now I just wanted Elena to keep hers. The decision came on a Tuesday morning. Mom's hands shook as she opened the email from our lawyer. The judge had granted Frank supervised in-person visits. Once a month, Elena would have to spend 2 hours with him at a court-approved facility. Mom collapsed into a chair while I read the rest. Frank's lawyer had successfully argued that video calls weren't enough for meaningful reconnection. Elena ran to the bathroom when I told her. I heard her retching, then water running. She emerged 20 minutes later with red eyes and wet hair. Mom tried to hug her, but Elena pushed past us both to her room. Uncle Carlos arrived within the hour. He read through the entire decision, highlighting key sections. The judge acknowledged Elena's anxiety but attributed it to the separation, not Frank's behavior. They'd bought into the parental alienation narrative completely. Our lawyer called with limited options. We could appeal, but that would take months and likely fail. The visits would begin in 2 weeks regardless. Missing them would put Mom in contempt of court, potentially costing her custody entirely. I spent that night researching the visitation facility. It was 40 miles away, a converted office building with cameras in every room. Supervisors would monitor continuously, but Frank would finally have physical access to Elena again. Elena stopped going to school. She'd get dressed, eat breakfast, then lock herself in the bathroom until the bus passed. Mom had to call in sick from work repeatedly to stay home with her. The truancy notices started piling up. Frank's supporters celebrated online. They posted about justice being served, about a father's love conquering alienation. Someone leaked that the visits involved our family, though they didn't have our names yet. Elena lived in terror of being identified. Mom tried everything to prepare Elena. She bought new clothes for the visits, practiced breathing exercises, promised rewards afterward, but Elena would start shaking whenever Mom mentioned Frank's name. The court order might as well have been a death sentence. I skipped school to attend a meeting with Elena's principal. The truancy was becoming serious. If it continued, the state would investigate, potentially removing Elena from our home. Frank's plan was working perfectly, using the system against us. The principal suggested independent study as a temporary solution. Elena could complete coursework at home while we resolved family issues. It wasn't ideal, but it bought us time. I picked up her assignments twice a week. 3 days before the first visit, Frank's lawyer filed another motion. They wanted the supervisor positioned outside the room, allowing Frank private time with Elena. The timing of Frank's legal motion seems oddly perfect. Requesting private time just days before the first visit, his prison religious conversion happening right when he needs character witnesses, makes me wonder who's really coaching him through this legal chess game. They argued the constant monitoring prevented genuine bonding. Our lawyer fought it immediately. The emergency hearing was scheduled for the morning of the visit. We'd have to drive to court, argue the motion, then potentially drive Elena straight to see Frank. The cruelty of the timing wasn't accidental. That night, Elena asked me to cut her hair. She wanted it short, nothing like the little girl Frank remembered. I used Mom's sewing scissors in the bathroom, trying to make it even. Hair fell around us like snow while Elena stared at her reflection. Mom cried when she saw Elena's shorn head the next morning, but Elena seemed calmer somehow, like she'd taken some small control back. She ate breakfast for the first time in days, though she couldn't keep it down. The courthouse was packed when we arrived. Frank's supporters filled one side, holding signs about father's rights. Some recognized us from previous hearings, pointing and whispering. Uncle Carlos formed a protective barrier with other family members. Inside the courtroom, Frank appeared on video from prison. He'd grown a beard, making him look older, softer. He gasped when he saw Elena's hair, then started crying about his baby girl changing without him. The judge listened to both arguments. Frank's lawyer painted the supervisor as an intrusion on sacred father-daughter bonding. Our lawyer emphasized Elena's documented anxiety and Frank's history. The tension in the room was suffocating. After an hour of deliberation, the judge compromised. The supervisor would remain in the room but positioned at a distance, able to see but not hear quiet conversation. It was the worst possible outcome, giving Frank exactly what he wanted. We had 2 hours before the visit. Elena threw up twice in the courthouse bathroom while Mom rubbed her back. I wanted to run, take Elena, and disappear, but Uncle Carlos reminded me that would only give Frank ammunition. The drive to the visitation facility felt like a funeral procession. Elena sat between Mom and me in Uncle Carlos's car, gripping both our hands. Her palms were sweaty but ice cold. Nobody spoke the entire 40 miles. The facility looked like a cross between a daycare and a jail. Bright murals covered reinforced walls. Security cameras blinked in every corner. The receptionist checked us in with professional detachment, explaining the rules we already knew by heart. Frank was already there, waiting in room 3. Through the observation window, I saw him arranging coloring books and toys on a small table. He wore civilian clothes the prison had approved, trying to look like a normal father. Elena froze when she saw him. Mom had to practically carry her to the door. The supervisor, a tired-looking woman with a clipboard, reminded us about the 2-hour duration. No early departure without documented emergency. I wasn't allowed in the room. Mom neither. We had to wait in the lobby where a camera showed a wide-angle view of the visit. The supervisor took Elena's hand and led her inside. The door closed with a decisive click. On the monitor, I watched Frank's face light up when Elena entered. He moved toward her, but the supervisor gestured for him to stay seated. Elena chose a chair as far from Frank as possible, pulling her knees to her chest. Frank started talking immediately, gesturing at the toys and books. Elena didn't wouldn't move. He picked up a doll, making it dance across the table. Elena turned her face away. The supervisor made notes on her clipboard. After 20 minutes, Frank was crying. He kept reaching toward Elena, stopping just short of touching her. The supervisor had to remind him about physical contact rules twice. Elena hadn't said a single word or moved from her defensive position. Mom paced the lobby while I watched the monitor. Other families came and went, some looking happy, others as miserable as us. A woman recognized Mom from Frank's support group online, shooting us dirty looks. An hour in, Frank convinced Elena to color with him. She chose a page with flowers, filling them in with mechanical precision. Frank colored a butterfly, chatting constantly, though Elena never responded. The normalcy of it made my skin crawl. Then Frank made his move. While showing Elena his butterfly, he leaned in close, whispering something the supervisor couldn't hear. Elena went rigid. She dropped her crayon and started scratching at her arms, leaving red marks. The supervisor intervened, moving Frank back to his side of the table, but the damage was done. Elena was hyperventilating, rocking in her chair. The supervisor tried to calm her while Frank played innocent, claiming he'd only complimented her coloring. The remaining time crawled by. Elena shut down completely, staring at the wall while Frank alternated between crying and trying to engage her. The supervisor looked increasingly uncomfortable, but couldn't end the visit early without cause. Finally, the 2 hours ended. The supervisor brought Elena out, and she collapsed into Mom's arms. Frank pressed against the observation window, calling out though we couldn't hear him. His face twisted with rage when I led Elena away. In the car, Elena finally spoke. Frank had whispered that she'd always be his baby, that he'd make sure of it when he got out. The supervisor hadn't heard, and it wasn't technically a threat, just a promise that made Elena scratch her skin raw. Back home, Mom documented Elena's scratches and emotional state. Our lawyer said it might help modify future visits, but probably wouldn't cancel them. Frank had been too careful, too clever. The whisper
Purdue Global was there for me at a time of great uncertainty in my life. I really wasn't sure what was going to happen, what the future was going to hold, and I thought if I want to try to do something
The whisper would be his word against Elena's. That night, I found Elena in the bathroom with Mom's sewing scissors. She wasn't trying to hurt herself, just cutting her remaining hair even shorter. She wanted to look nothing like the baby Frank remembered. I helped her finish, understanding the desperate need for control. The next morning brought new harassment. Someone had posted photos of us entering the visitation facility on Frank's support page. Our faces were blurred, but people who knew us would recognize us. The comments called Mom a monster for keeping Frank from his daughter. Elena refused to eat for 3 days. Mom had to negotiate every sip of water, every bite of toast. The doctor prescribed anxiety medication, but Elena wouldn't take pills that might make her less alert. She needed to be ready for whatever came next. Frank's lawyer filed a report about the successful visit. They claimed Elena had colored with Frank, proof that their bond was repairing. The scratches were dismissed as nervous habits. They requested increased frequency, maybe twice monthly. I started sleeping on Elena's floor. She'd wake up screaming about Frank taking her away, about being forced back into baby clothes. I'd hold her until she stopped shaking, promising I'd never let him touch her again. Mom took leave from work to focus on Elena's care. Her boss was understanding but couldn't hold her position indefinitely. The bills kept coming while income stopped. Uncle Carlos covered our utilities, but pride prevented Mom from accepting more. 2 weeks later, we received notice that Frank's parole hearing had been moved up. Good behavior and program completion made him eligible sooner. He could be free in 3 months, with court-ordered access to Elena. The thought broke something in Mom. She called our lawyer, offering to sign away her parental rights if it would protect Elena, but that would only give Frank stronger claim. The system was designed to reunify families, not protect children from legal manipulation. Elena heard Mom's conversation and made her own decision. She started eating again, taking the anxiety medication, even doing her schoolwork, but it wasn't recovery. She was preparing for war, building strength for whatever came next. I helped her research self-defense techniques online. We practiced in the garage, learning pressure points and escape moves. The supervisor wouldn't let Frank grab her, but Elena needed to feel prepared. Control over her body was all she had left. Frank's next call was different. He spoke calmly about his upcoming parole, his plans to get an apartment near us, how he'd petition for unsupervised visits. He knew we were listening to every word, painting a picture of Elena's future that made her medication useless against the panic. Our lawyer filed motion after motion trying to restrict Frank's parole conditions. Each one cost money we didn't have. Mom sold everything valuable, even her wedding ring. The irony of funding Elena's protection with symbols of her marriage to Frank wasn't lost on anyone. The second visit arrived too quickly. Elena dressed in layers despite the heat, armor against Frank's gaze. She'd hidden safety pins in her pockets, small, sharp comforts. The drive felt shorter this time, dread making time compress. Frank had prepared better too. He'd styled his hair like he used to wear it, even found cologne similar to his old brand. He wanted to trigger Elena's earliest memories, the baby who'd loved her daddy before understanding what he was. This time, Elena didn't freeze. She walked to the chair herself, sat down, and stared directly at Frank. When he offered toys, she pushed them aside. When he tried to color, she took the crayons and broke them one by one. The supervisor warned Elena about destructive behavior. Frank played victim, crying about